First of all, I'd like to welcome you all to the Center for Political and Development Studies. Today we have one-day course on nonviolence in collaboration with the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict in DC. We have 4 speakers. Muhammad al-Hammami, who holds BA in Policy and Government from the United States. He will speak about the experience of the civil rights movement in the US and Northern Ireland. Wala al-Hussein, who is finishing her BA at the university and who writes for she will speak about the experience of India and South Africa. And then we will have 2 more Skype sessions with Catherine Freitag from the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict and Hardy Merriman, who is the president of the center. And meanwhile, we'll have a lunch break. I hope you enjoy the day. It's a long day, so try to raise questions and comments so that you make it interesting and interactive. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf. Welcome, everyone. First, I want to thank you for being here with us today. And I want to apologize for not having my slides up. My laptop broke down yesterday, so instead we will be working on the outline I passed. Okay? So we will be talking about the same thing. You know, I will be saying the same things, minus the pictures that I was preparing. My name is Muhammad al-Hammami. I have a BA degree in Public Policy and Government. My colleague here is Wala. I will be speaking for 14 minutes, and then Wala will be speaking for 40 minutes, and then we will have about 40 minutes to do a discussion about the things that we will be talking about. So if you have any questions as I speak about the nature of what I explained, that's fine, raise your hand. But if it's a discussion question, you can leave it toward the end. Okay? All right. So before I start, I was told that we have to talk about the examples of nonviolence resistance. And I thought that before we start, I want to talk about the nature of nonviolence. There is a big misconception that nonviolence is pure nonviolence. So I asked the question, is nonviolence resistance really not violent? Right? Because that is the question. And people are sensitive about nonviolence resistance because they think that it is a replacement for violent resistance. And I will show in the 2 cases, I will show one, Martin Luther King, who argues that it should be a replacement, and then the Northern Ireland case where nonviolence resistance go hand in hand with violent resistance. And then we can see what we can apply to the Palestine case and the Gaza Strip case. Okay? So to answer the question, is nonviolence resistance really not violent? I don't think nonviolent resistance is not violent.
It depends on the situation itself.
Sure, but the concept of nonviolence, I do not think it is not violent. Why? Because we will talk more about it as we study the case. Because for me, the way I see it, nonviolence is the channeling of violence. So basically, you become the recipient of violence, right? So it is still violent. And the goal is to win the sympathy, the empathy, and then the support. And I ordered them this, I put them in this order on purpose. Because sympathy is to feel for the other person. Empathy is to put yourself in his shoes, right? And only this would lead to action, okay? Which is the support that you need, right? And then the other goal, the second goal, is reconciliation as opposed to revenge. So the ultimate goal, what you see, the long-term goal of nonviolence, as argued by the people who practice it, is to have reconciliation, basically peaceful coexistence, to make peace with the oppressed, right? As opposed to take revenge, for example. Because the argument goes that violence causes violence. It's a circle. So the only way to stop it is to be the stronger person and to go ahead with nonviolent resistance. So let's keep that question hovering around as we go in. The question of is nonviolence resistance really not violent? Okay? The United States case, which is first of all, I want to say that this is a complicated topic, and I cannot go into deep details because we have a limited time. So I hope that with what we do, at least we have a glimpse of, little information of the situation that these people have. Okay, so the first case is the United States. Okay, the African-American civil rights movement. So a little background. I'm not sure if you are aware of the history of the U.S. or the civil rights movement, but the Europeans colonized the United States. White Europeans colonized it. And many of them brought with them slaves, black Africans from Africa to work on their slave plantations. They planted cottons, sugar, exactly, tea, etc. And they needed labor, and they needed cheap labor, so they brought slaves with them. So the society was divided into two groups: the whites, who are rich, and then the blacks, who are slaves, basically, and poor. And then came Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War, and he did the Civil War in order to, one of the reasons were to free the slaves. So he abolished slavery. Now the problem is, there were a lot of years, a lot of development that happened in the US during these years. The whites naturally became the superior class because they were the masters.
Yes.
And then the slaves, even when they are free, they are still the poor class.
They were the inferior stage.
The inferior class. So even now, even at this moment, this is still a problem because the whites had a start. They started earlier with, in terms of education, wealth. Their class started earlier than the blacks. They were left behind. Okay? So now in the 60s, there was the problem of segregation. The blacks were segregated and the whites were segregated. In terms of school, in terms of recreational facilities, in terms of toilets, transportation, etc. The whites had better facilities while the blacks had worse facilities. The government put more money into the whites areas than the blacks areas. So this created big problems. Now comes Martin Luther King. So now, before we start with his message, we need to know who he is. He was...
I have a dream.
Right, he's very most famous for the I Have a Dream speech. He was a pastor, a Christian pastor. So when he talks about love, right, we have to understand that it comes from his deep belief in his religion, right? Because the Christian belief is all about loving, they all say, love thy enemy, love your enemy, love your neighbor, love yourself. God loves you. Jesus died for your sin because he loves you. So it's all about loving the other person. So Martin Luther King believed, and he preached this, that the only way to solve this issue of segregation is through what he calls love or nonviolence resistance. So the way to love your enemy is to engage with them in nonviolent resistance, right? As opposed to having guns and shooting at the whites, because the whites were vicious, right? There was the KKK clan, the KKK group, which lynched blacks. They literally hanged them, right? Whenever they saw them. So Martin Luther King, what he preached was to engage with the whites in nonviolent resistance. Why? Going back to the goals. The first goal was to win the sympathy, empathy, and support. One, from the international community, and two, from the oppressing community, the white community. How do you do that? The first, you have to, now, when we think about nonviolent resistance in Palestine, we think of Belain, right? The
Yes.
wall. People who go out on Friday, after Friday prayer, right, to Bethlehem, for example.
Yes.
And they go on marches, and then they throw rocks, right? Martin Luther King would not call this nonviolent resistance. Because the moment you throw rocks, even though you cannot compare a rock to stun grenades or gas grenades, right?
Yes, but I don't
Or to the Israeli army. You cannot compare them, This is something and this is another. But the fact that you threw a rock, he considered it that you kind of lost the battle. Why? Martin Luther King, before he engaged in marches, before he engaged in sit-ins, right? I'll talk about this in a bit. He made sure that whoever is participating with him, they went through extensive workshops. A workshop to train you not to respond to any types of violence. So if a police officer comes and punches you in the face, you have to let it go. You have to take it. Right? If a police officer releases a dog on you, you have to get bitten and not respond. You cannot punch him back. You cannot throw a rock. Why? Because there are cameras, the press. And when they take the picture, when they take the video, you have to look as the victim. You cannot be the one, it cannot be a fight, right? It has to be an oppressor, the police officer, and the oppressed you, right? And the only way to do it is to take the violence. Because this is the only way to feel the sympathy. And then, when the international community sees these pictures, these pictures, they have to feel for the oppressed. Look at these defenseless black Americans who are only asking for their rights, and look at these brutal police officers who are hitting them, and they did nothing, right? And then, back to the question, is nonviolence resistance really not violent? See, Martin Luther King did not pick his marches randomly. He did not pick the place or the cities that he marched in randomly. He picked places where he was 100% sure that the police will respond with violence. For example, the most popular example is the march in Selma in 1965. There's a movie about it, came out I think 2 years ago, last year. It's a very popular march. Martin Luther King and hundreds of black Americans joined by minority of whites marched in Selma, a place called Selma in Arizona. And he picked Selma because he knew that they are racist. The people who live there are racist, and that the authorities are fools. Why? Because they are going to respond to these marches, peaceful marches, with violence. And that the cameras will be rolling. The cameras will be recording. And that's what happened. He went to Selma, and then the police officers with their dogs, they released the dogs on the protesters. A lot of the protesters were injured, and the cameras were recording. And that won the sympathy of the international community to that cause.
But we show that it's not an equal battle.
Right, it's not an equal battle. Not only not equal, but that you are defenseless, like purely defenseless. Right. Another example of the strategies of Martin Luther King was the sit-ins. So they would go to white-only restaurants and they would sit there as blacks, as groups.
Yes.
And then they would wait until they would kick them out. Right? Why? Because this is one of the ways to, when you hit a defenseless person, there's no way that you would not feel bad about it. Eventually, at least, you will feel bad about it. When someone is asking for his right to equal education and equal opportunity and good housing, and then you hit them and you release the dog on them, there is no way that you would not feel bad about that, at least slight guilt about it. And that was the hope. So the strategy is built, and that's what I believe, it's all built on the hope that, and it's not 100% true, there's no certainty about it, but it's all about the hope that the international community and the oppressor community will feel guilty about what is happening, and that would lead to action, especially from the government or the officials that have the power to create change. But again, there are always violent elements. So besides Martin Luther King, who preached nonviolence, who was opposed to violent resistance or violence for the civil rights cause, there were people, other groups who practiced violence. Two examples are the Black Panthers, you probably know about them, who actually wanted their own black country within the United States. They wanted to secede. And then there's the Nation of Islam. Malcolm X was part of it, and then he left them. But Nation of Islam and the Black Panthers, they preached violence and they practiced it. And I think this is important because in order, and I think Martin Luther King also knew this, in order for nonviolence to work, there has to be violent elements from outside. So basically what he's trying to say, we are nonviolent, and we want our rights. You should give them to us, otherwise there are also people with weapons out there who will shoot people, right? If you do not give us our rights non-violently, right? And this is important. And that's basically the U.S. case in short, briefly. Then we have there are rights, the rights issue. So people were rioting in the United States. They would go to the streets and the shops. They would break glasses. They would steal things, right? And people. It happened last year also in what was it?
Baltimore.
Baltimore, right? And what did Martin Luther King say about this? He said, rights are the language of the unheard. So if you do not hear us, if you do not give us our rights, people will go out to the streets and break things, and then and you will not like it. So there are always violent elements in the nonviolent resistance. The second case that I will be talking about, so that's the first case, and we can talk about this. And think about how we can apply this to Palestine. Is it applicable in the first place to Palestine and the Gaza Strip? And then, how can we apply it? The second case is Northern Ireland, and I think this is more close to our case. But this is for you to think about. Now, the Northern Ireland case. So basically, Ireland is an island, right? It's an island right next to the UK. It was separated. Northern Ireland was separated from Ireland in 1921. It's in the north, right? And it officially became part of the United Kingdom. So the United Kingdom is a couple of areas,
Yes.
the Wales,
Scotland,
England, Northern Ireland. So in 1921, it officially became part of the UK. There are two communities in Northern Ireland. The Protestant community, and I don't want to go too much into the background. There is the Protestant community and there is the Catholic community. Ireland in general was always Catholic. And they felt that they are one people. It doesn't matter if you're from Northern Ireland or Ireland, they're all one people. And it was always Catholic. Not being Catholic wasn't just about religion, but it was about an identity. So it's like Jewish and Palestinian here, because being a Jewish nowadays is more of, they don't see it, a lot of Jews do not see it as religion, because they're either atheist or secular, but they see it as a matter of identity. So they say, I don't believe in God, but I'm Jewish.
Yes.
Right? So it was similar there. So the Protestants and the Catholics saw it as a matter of identity. Now, when the British came to Northern Ireland, they occupied it and took control of it. They, over the years, a lot of Protestant people from the UK, from England, went or came to Northern Ireland, and then they were planted there, similar to how the settlements are in the West Bank. Over the years, there became more and more people there, And then there was discrimination between the Protestants and the Catholics in terms of education. So the Protestants would get more money for their schools than the Catholics. In terms of housing, the Protestants would get cheaper and more affordable housings than the Catholics. In terms of employment opportunities, for example, there was it wasn't in the slides. There was a quote from someone who was running for the prime minister, and he was addressing the unionists in. He was addressing a union, an association of Protestants in Northern Ireland, and he said, that was in the 30s. He said, "Do not these Catholics, or what they are called Republicans, because they wanted a Republic of Ireland, or they are called." He called them disloyal, right? Disloyal,
Yes.
because they are disloyal to the
Their
English
country.
crown. The English crown. He called them these disloyals. Do not employ them. Do not give them the opportunity to have good housing and good education, because otherwise they are going to become better than us and more than us, and then they will take over. So there was this distrust, and they were public about it. It wasn't even hidden. There was public discrimination. So this led to violent reaction. A phase called, the English called it the Troubles, but it is internationally called the Northern Ireland conflict. It started in 1968. And what happened is that, people went to the streets asking for their rights. They wanted better education, better opportunities, equality. The British and the government did not give it to them. They believe that the only way to do it is through violence. So a lot of paramilitaries. A paramilitary is a group of people who picked up guns, basically, and semi-organized. So it's not an army, but it's not really volunteer people. It's more organized than that. So a lot of paramilitary people, paramilitary groups emerged. Some from the Protestant side, and some from the Catholic side. The most famous two from the Catholic side is the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. They took the name from an older IRA. So some call it the Provisional IRA. The other, for the Unionist side, there's the Ulster Volunteer Forces. And these people were violent. And many, looking back at it, you could see that, they killed innocents, and they killed non-innocent people, or people from the military. The most famous, and the British forces were also part of it. I had some examples, but we can skip that. Because we want to focus on the non-violent part. So it was a violent, the point is, it was a violent conflict. And there were a lot of people, innocent people dying. And then there were a lot of bombs planted in cities and in coffee shops, right? And hotels too. And the British forces were vicious also, because they also killed a lot of innocents. So the UK, the British side is not innocent of any, it's not innocent, okay? So the forms and strategies of non-violence in Northern Ireland. The first one, the blanket protest. Now, when you are arrested in Northern Ireland before 1978, you are put as special category status. You are given special category status. Basically, you are not treated as a criminal. Okay? So, what do criminals do? They are given special uniforms, prison uniforms. They do prison work, and they are treated as criminals. People who did something wrong, right? Murder, theft, etc. People who were engaged in the violence during the Northern Ireland conflict, they were treated as political prisoners. Political prisoners do not wear prison uniforms. They do not do prison work, and they are given more rights. They can associate with other prisoners, etc. And they are not treated as criminals. So you don't see yourself as someone who did something wrong. You did the right thing and you're paying for it. You know, you got caught, you are in prison and you're paying for it. But you are not a criminal. And that's significant. After 1978, because the UK wanted to punish the IRA, they took away the special category status.
Yes.
They took away the special category status starting from 1978. The first prisoner to be caught from the IRA was Kiara Nugent. He was sent to the Maze prison and he was given prison uniform. And he did not like it. So he started something called the blanket protest. He refused the prison uniform and he took the blankets off his bed and he wrapped it around him. And he wore it as his clothes. So this was the protest. Other prisoners, when they heard about this protest, they joined in. Now, because the conditions in the prisons were bad, and the demands of the IRA and the Catholic prisoners were not met, they did not return the special category status. The Protestants, the paramilitary Catholics, especially the IRA, outside of prison, they were retaliating. So what they did, they were targeting security forces and killing them, right? As a response to the conditions inside the prison. And because of this, the jailers, the prison guards, they were punishing the prisoners. So now the prison, I don't have the picture, but the prison is a closed room. It doesn't have a bathroom. In order to go to the bathroom, you have to ask the guard to take you to the bathroom. So he would take you, and there was a walk to the bathroom.
Yes.
Now, this walk was the beating walk. So whenever a prisoner from the IRA would leave the prison, the prisoners, the jailers would beat him, with
Yes.
sticks and they would punch him. So it is as a punishment for what is happening outside the prison, for targeting the security forces. The prisoners escalated their protest, and then they started something called the dirty protest. So basically what they did, and I'm sorry if I have to illustrate this, but what they did, they refused to go to the bathroom. So what they did was when they had to go, they would take their experiment and they would throw it outside the window, basically. Now the security forces, the jailers noticed this, and they decided to seal the window. They would seal it with wood, whatever. So what did the prisoners do? They took it and then they put it on the walls, basically. So the conditions, and there was a cameraman who made it to the prison, and they took the picture, and they saw how the conditions were awful and terrible, right? And this brought the issue of the prisoners to the international media. This is also a form of nonviolent resistance, right? But the conditions inside the prison did not improve. So they started something called the First Hunger Strike in 1980. The First Hunger Strike, they had 5 demands. They wanted the right to not wear prison uniforms, the right to not do prison work, the right to associate with other prisoners and see them, talk, the right to organize educational facilities and recreational facilities. So they wanted to have their educational centers inside and different activities. The last demand was 1 visit, 1 letter, and 1 parcel. So it's a package, 1 package every week, per week. These demands were not met. So they started the First Hunger Strike. It lasted for 53 days. And then, again, it went to the international media. It brought attention to the conditions inside the prison, and it stopped after 53 days. After the intervention of the government from Ireland, the Irish country of Ireland, and promises from the UK government. The UK government drafted a piece of paper, and they put some conditions there. And they made promises, so they stopped the hunger. Now, when it came to applying these, what they agreed upon,
Yes.
the UK government did not really meet the promises that they gave. So basically, for example, they said, okay, you will not wear prison uniforms, but we will issue you civilian clothes, but they are from prison, right? So everybody's wearing the same clothes, civilian clothes, inside the prison. So it's another form of prison uniform, but it looks different. So they said no. The prisoner said, this is not what we were promised. So a guy called Bobby Sands, he's the most famous hunger striker in Northern Ireland. He started a second hunger strike in 1981. Now, there was a split between the IRA leadership within the prison and outside the prison. The people outside the prison did not want a hunger strike. They were done. They didn't want to do it. And they did not want the hunger strike to take the light from the actual issue outside, which is the freedom of the Irish people, the Catholics, the unification of Northern Ireland with the Irish country. But people inside the prison did not listen, and they started the second hunger strike. Bobby Sands was the most famous. Now, when he started his hunger strike, in March 1981, he was nominated to be a member of parliament inside the UK. A month later, from his constituency, so from his area he was living, and people voted for him. The second, after a month, he was elected. So he was the first hunger striker, and he was young. I think he was like 29. He was the youngest member of parliament, and he was a member of parliament who was in prison. So this was something big, something significant. But the conditions, the demands of the hunger strikers were not met. So he continued his hunger strike, and then he died from starvation in May 1981. And this was huge, because this shows the wickedness of the UK government. How could you make someone starve to death for these simple demands, right? Margaret Thatcher, known as the Iron Lady, she was the Prime Minister of the UK at the time, and she was holding her stance on treating the IRA as terrorists, and she did not lean at all.
She was a killer.
She was a butcher.
Yes, she was a killer.
They say that about 100,000 people attended the funeral of Bobby Sands. And during the hunger strike, a lot of international organizations and governments showed their support of the hunger strike. For example, Bernie Sanders, the presidential candidate from the U.S., during the hunger strike, he sent a letter to Thatcher, showing his concern about the issue inside the prison, and criticizing her for not doing anything about it. By August 1981, so the hunger strike continued after the death of Bobby Sands, who was the first to die. 10 people died, one after another. The way they did it, the way in Palestine and the hunger strike, they would eat, they would drink water with salt. They would have vitamins, and they would take pills.
They force-feeding them.
Yes.
There is the issue of force feeding, but those who were not force fed, so they would take vitamin pills in order to stay alive, in order to make it longer. The Irish hunger strikers, they did not have vitamins, they did not drink water with salt. It was a pure hunger strike. That's why they died after 50 or 60 days. They died of starvation.
Yes.
So there was a huge internal and external reaction. Now, this hunger strike brought a lot of sympathy from within the community of the Catholics to the IRA. Now, not everybody. So here, not everybody was with the IRA because of their tactics, because of they were violent, and sometimes they killed innocents. Not everybody was with the IRA, but after the hunger strike, the community started to support them more. Okay, so this created some, and this is important. I think this is where we can think about it in terms of Gaza Strip and Palestine. There is a political party called the Sinn Féin. The Sinn Féin is the political faction of the IRA. So like how here Hamas is the political faction, and then the Al-Qassam is the military wing.
Yes.
The IRA is the same thing. The IRA, the Irish Republican Army, is the military wing, and Sinn Féin is the political party. Now, before the hunger strike, Sinn Féin was just a puppet. So they would just do whatever the IRA told them. They were the propaganda mouthpiece, basically. After the hunger strike, they saw themselves as a political force. They saw that nonviolent means could actually work, and because people elected Bobby Sands, there were other two people also who were elected. They saw that actually you might be able to create change from within the government. So they emerged as a political force, and then they employed a strategy called the Armalite and the ballot books. The Armalite is a type of weapon. It's a rifle, the AR-15 or whatever it's called. It's very popular it's what the IRA used. They smuggled a lot of pieces from this weapon, and it became a symbol of the IRA. So now, if you look up, if you go to Google and look up IRA, and then you see them holding the weapon, it's most probably the Armalite. Okay, so that was the symbol of the Irish resistance. So they call it the Armalite and the ballot box strategy. Basically, armed resistance and non-armed resistance going strategy. Their logo or their motto was, not everybody can plant a bomb, but everyone can plant a vote. So if you cannot hold a gun and go fight, you can still contribute to the cause of the Irish people. Because they knew that everybody is sympathetic to the IRA cause. They want to have a union. They want to go back to being part of Ireland. But not everybody approved of the IRA tactics. Not everybody approved of violence acts and killing innocents, whether it's direct or indirect. So they said, okay, fine. If you do not want to hold a weapon, at least vote for us. At least contribute some way. So, and that's what they did. They got more support, as opposed to the Social Democratic and Labour Party. That's another Catholic party that was opposed to violence, and they had the major support of the Catholic community, of the Irish community in Northern Ireland. Now, after the hunger strike and the emergence of Sinn Féin, Sinn Féin started to have more support. And they say that the Anglo-Irish Agreement, that's an agreement in 1985 between the UK government and the Irish government. It was not the end of the conflict, but the agreement basically stated that if Northern Ireland wants to become part of Ireland, they have to have a referendum. People would vote for it, so it has to be non-violent. And the Irish government would have a consultancy seat in terms of solving the issue, and other terms too. Anyways, so they say that because of the emergence of Sinn Féin as a political force, the UK government feared that they would replace the Labour Party or the Social Democratic Labour Party as a main force within the Catholic community. So they started to become lenient a little bit. I would argue, that's my opinion, but a year before, in 1984, Margaret Thatcher was almost assassinated in a hotel in the UK, and the IRA was the one behind it. And the day after the assassination attempt, they went to the press, and then they basically said, they addressed Margaret Thatcher, and they said, we have to be lucky once, but you have to be lucky always. Give Ireland peace, and you will see peace. That was the message, basically, right? And I think that was part of it. And when someone is close to death, I think that's when you kind of have to give up a little bit of your position. But I think that it's a mixture of both. So in the Northern Ireland case, I think it's a mixture of non-violence with violent resistance. The case was ended the conflict was ended in 1998 after the Good Friday Agreement. And the agreement is basically built on the Anglo-Irish Agreement. So they agreed that the IRA and all the paramilitaries would give up their weapons, and that if Northern Ireland to become part of Ireland, there has to be a referendum, and people will have to vote for it. So it has to be a peaceful transition of power, or a transition from being part of the UK to being part of Armalite. So these are the two examples that I have. If you have any questions, let me know. Now with that, we'll start with other cases to visit. Okay?
Would you like to take the questions first?
Sure, yeah. If you have any questions, let me know about it.
In fact, it's not a question, it's a comment.
Okay.
In fact, these IRA, I consider them as brave people.
Well,
You know why? They are occupied, and they want to fight. They wanted to fight for their freedom.
right, they want to
So
pick up
when
the
they
position.
wanted to fight their freedom, non-violent ways did not work with them, with the English people, or with the UK kingdom. So they started, or they chose to fight.
Sure,
So-
yeah. I mean, it's similar to our case. You know, where when someone is provoked, the response is natural. Someone will have to pick up a weapon and fight. So yeah, you can see it as this way. But some would argue that their goals were not met because Northern Ireland is still part of the UK. It's not part of. So was it successful? Is violent resistance of the IRA successful? I'm not sure. That's what I mean. Yeah.
But they have the right to defend
Of
themselves.
course. Now, when we talk about resistance, violent resistance and non-violent resistance, my personal opinion is that we're not trying to replace one over the or to put one over the other. It's just we're looking what is the better strategy. How on the long term, you know, to have a long vision. What is the better strategy? What would bring your goals into fact? Right? Is it nonviolent resistance? And when we say nonviolent resistance, we don't mean the marches in Berlin. That's important. Or is it violent resistance?
Non-violent
Or is it a mixture of both?
does not work. Especially the case of Palestine, the
Well-
Palestinian cause.
We will see where it worked with Wala. We will talk about India and South Africa, where it
Yes,
was a mix
South
of violence
Africa.
and non-violence. But the biggest part was non-violence. Yeah.
But here comes the answer to the question that there is no pure non-violence resistance because you cannot tackle or handle an issue without addressing the opposite part of it. It's violent.
Right.
You need to involve or associate it to the issue in order to get your rights and the results you intend to have.
Sure. I mean, that's my argument is that there are always violent elements. But the people like Gandhi and people like Martin Luther King, when they preach non-violence, they preach it in a pure way. Like, you are going to get hit, and you are not going to respond. You know, that's their argument. So they might take advantage of the violent elements within the society and say, we are peaceful. Listen to us, unless you want to face these the other groups, right?
Yes.
Sure, but to them, they say we are not peaceful and we are not violent. We just want our rights, right? And again, the argument is they wanted to show that they are the victims, and not just show, but like to make them feel this way, to make them feel like oppressors, to make them feel like.
This is
Like,
an illogical thing because you cannot die or just stand still while beaten or.
This is why it's hard. This is why it's hard. That's why a lot of people who marched with Martin Luther King, they had to go through
Do
workshops.
you think it's harder than the violence?
It is harder. I think it's harder, personally. How could you get hit without responding?
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. I mean, people do it. I mean, these people did it. You know, these people did it. And in Gandhi's case, they did it too.
But they need to sacrifice.
It is. It takes a lot of. I think it is harder, and you have to be stronger.
We have to-
Willed stronger in the will. You know, you have to be willed to take the hit and not respond.
Believes, yeah.
Especially our
Because you have the hope that this is the right thing to do and this will bring better results. Not because, I mean, I imagine you like, if someone hits you, you really want to, punch him in the face. I bet that's how they felt too. But they took it because they felt that In the
You have to
future,
love
that's
it.
the better
Yeah.
choice. In the future, this will bring results, not if I punch him back.
But these trials were the first, so they were not sure if they would get what they stand for. I mean, there's no previous non-violence trials or attempts that they can rely on the results.
For which
They
case?
were, I mean, both, but for the.
I mean, for the U.S. case, Martin Luther King's vision was built on Gandhi's. So Gandhi was the first, I would say, and he was his
even
godfather.
Gandhi, you know, he cannot say, or he couldn't say, yeah, that trial worked out
Right,
somewhere
sure,
else,
yeah.
so I will do it. He was
Yeah, that's why
fast,
it's
so-
something radical, it's something
Yeah.
new. But for the hunger strike, the special category status, it wasn't given from the very beginning. The 40 IRA members had to go on a hunger strike in order to get the status before 1978, and then it was taken away again. So when people went to the hunger strike in 1980, they went to it. They did it because they knew that it worked before, right? But so yeah.
We have to fight till the end.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Our cause is totally
Yeah, we
different.
have to
That's an
be
argument.
We are in Cuba for more than
logical.
60 years. We
Yeah.
are being bombed by the same bombers. We are being robbed by the same robbers.
that's an argument.
In
That's
the
an
name of
argument.
what?
That's an argument. This is why we're here, is to discuss. Can nonviolence work in Palestine? Can it bring results?
And
I'm not.
Can it?
No, I'm not.
You're very what?
extremely.
No, I'm not. I have the right to defend myself.
Nobody's saying you don't. Nobody's
But
saying you
I'm
don't.
extreme.
But you
But
choose
is it a
way.
better strategy to fight nonviolently?
Okay, but the non-violent, what does it do?
You're encouraging the terrorists.
مثلا ام بالعيد or
I don't consider it successful. I don't consider it
Successful.
In fact,
because
settlers,
when the cameras are rolling, when people take
in fact,
pictures, there are
settlers
people.
are being robbed our lands there in the West Bank. And by the way, they are going to discuss an issue to join the West Bank to them.
Sure. I
So
know what you're
non-violent
saying,
ways.
but
Non-violent
Yeah,
ways.
because it doesn't work with every enemy because
But-
you know.
so there are two questions. Question number one: would nonviolence work in Palestine? Question number two: did violence work in Palestine? We've been fighting for how long? Right? So you have to look at these two questions and then
Yeah.
decide. Look at the pros and then the cons. And look at the positives and the negatives of both and see and decide. You cannot look at the immediate results or actions, right? You have to look.
To the long-term
On
vision.
the long term.
Yeah.
See, well, I wasn't going to discuss the Palestine case, but in my opinion, PDS is a very successful nonviolent resistance strategy and method because one, it's nonviolent. Two, it's inclusive, meaning everybody can join. It doesn't matter whether you're Palestinian or foreigner. It doesn't matter if you're left wing or center. You know, it doesn't matter if you're Fatah or
Right
Hamas. You can join. You know, it doesn't matter if you can fight with a gun or not. You can still join, right? So it's inclusive. But then a lot of people who oppose violence, they oppose it on moral basis. They say it's wrong because you hurt innocents. So they go to nonviolence. So that's why it's more inclusive. So it's morally right also. And it is appealing to Jewish people who still have emotional attachment to the Jews in Israel, right? So you say when you tell a Jewish person who's in the U.S. we can get Israel to follow international law if you boycott it, as opposed to fighting it with guns. He would choose the boycott. And in my opinion, it's more effective. It's more effective because, number one, Israel is superior militarily. They have nukes.
Yes, they
have
are
nukes.
armed.
And then they have the U.S. support.
Yes.
Um,
The international community, the
$3
international...
billion a year.
They are going to increase.
Right. So how do you fight that? Not violently. See,
So
that's
that
one.
international
Number two,
community-
unfortunately, Israel and the right-wing party, right, the left wing also,
Yes.
they take advantage of the Holocaust. What happened?
Holocaust.
They play the guilt card.
Yeah, the Holocaust industry.
They play the guilt card. Basically, what they're saying is, we were abused, we were oppressed, and I mean it happened, and it was very it was bad, right? It was awful. So Europe, you did this to us, now help us, right? And
They caused the
and
problem.
I studied in the U.S. and I traveled around there. Every single big city in the U.S. has something called the Holocaust Survival Museum. Every single major city. If you go to D.C., 1 minute, yeah, 1 minute. If you go to D.C., if you go to New York, if you go to San Francisco, whatever, you will find something called the Holocaust Survival Museum. If you study American history in high school there, you will study the World War II. And one of the major lessons they learned from World War II is Holocaust. Never again. That's what they say. So, and this is right. I mean, I agree with it. Never again. No people should be subjugated to this kind of oppression. But then the Israel comes and abuses this, unfortunately and awfully. They say, we are the Jews, you did this to us, now help us. Even though they are doing what was done to them. And this is wrong. So, in order to fight this, I think nonviolence works better. When you appeal to people, when you go on the street, right, saying, the Holocaust, Europeans or the Nazis did this to the Jews, and now they are doing this to us. You have to help us, not them, right? As opposed to holding a gun and attacking Israelis. The Israelis will say, look, they're fighting us. They're like Nazis, and they said that. Netanyahu said that. Hamas is like Nazis, and he's just crazy. And people don't believe him, but it's an argument
But
that he
Hamas
uses.
wasn't appeared before
I know, of course.
1987.
I mean, it's a natural. Holding a gun and fighting back is a natural reaction, and I completely agree with that. Completely agree with that. But the question is, what is the better way to respond to this issue? Is it violence, or is it non-violence, or is it a mix of both? That's
As
the
I
question.
told you before, it
Okay,
depends
we're moving
on the
forward.
situation.